Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt A.K. Stormageddon.
And you're listening to episode 118. And this episode, Matt and I wanted to talk about lists, particularly end of the year, game of the decade, most all these other things, kind of round up lists that everybody is obligated to make. I mean, it's the start of 2022 as of the recording of this episode and the release of it as well. And Matt and I made, I think, our first top 10 lists of the year on Twitter for 2021. So we're thinking about it.
Yeah, I started doing something in 2021 where I made a list of all the games I completed or beat that year. Complete means something completely and wholly different to us.
Rolled credits.
Yeah, I rolled credits on, and it was really fun to do it. I regret that it was only kind of a list, and this year I'm going to actually talk about the games as I complete them, as I finish them. But I liked doing that. It was fun to kind of, at the end of 2021, look back on all the games I played. That one of the first games I beat was Astro's Playroom because I had just gotten my PS5, things like that. So I thought it would be fun for Geoff and I to do our own Game of the Year list because neither of us really have a place to write, although we could freelance if we want. And I have submitted pitches to some websites. Mm-hmm. But I thought it would be fun for us to just do our own version of it. And we did, and we got some interaction. It was a lot of fun. Even some of the developers chimed in, which was really nice. We got a thank you from Kit Fox for talking about Boyfriend Dungeon, which was fun. And so I was like, we've never talked about Game of the Year lists on the podcast. And it's something that's pretty ubiquitous in the industry. We've had guests who work in the industry on the show. We plan to in the future as well. We've had guests who work in the industry all over SideQuest, and all of them have written Game of the Year lists. Sometimes it's top 10, sometimes it's top 5. Lots of sites also around round number years will do Game of the Decade or Game of the last 50, best games of the last 50 years, things like that. Mm-hmm. And there's always this thought that there's this hard and fast rule, myself included. The first time I ever did kind of my top 10, I think it was back in 2020, I included Yakuza 0, which came out before that. And I was like, can I do that? And my friend Jesse Vitelli, who has done side quests for us before, was like, it's your list. There are if anyone says you're wrong, you tell them to F off, It's it's your list. You can put whatever you want in it. And I thought it was important to talk about that a little because I feel like people... gaming discourse, especially on Twitter, can be difficult.
Harrowing.
Harrowing is a much better word, yeah. But I like talking about games, obviously, as we've done 117 of these things. Mm-hmm. More because there are some unnumbered episodes, but that's neither here nor there.
We like talking about games.
Yeah, and so I thought it would be fun to talk about the process of talking about games because, for my Game of the Year list, it was important this year for it to be all new games because I played so many new games. There were tons of old games I played this year too. And if I didn't have enough new games that I really liked, of course would have put old games on it. And on Geoff's list, there were a few games that didn't come out this year, but that, either got re-releases this year or Geoff played for the first time this year. And I think that any way that you want to interact with games and celebrate them over the course of the year is valid. I don't think there's a wrong way to do that, really.
Yeah, I mean... my list ended up being kind of informally alternated between games that were released in 2021 and games that I played for the first time in 2021.
Right.
And I definitely felt the compulsion, the impetus, the whatever, to do more new games in that list. Because if you're doing something like that, sometimes you want to have people aware of newer games. I mean, I'm certainly playing a bunch of those games that came out in 2020, 2019, 2017, in 2021 because it took me some time to get around to them. Something that, Matt, you and I are very open about on this show is there's so many games. There's so many games and there's more coming out and that never stops. It's not one thing after another. It's several things all at once forever. Forever. And you get to it when you get to it, and it often will hit you at just the right time, one hopes. When you finally sit down and play a game to roll credits, it's because it's the right time. And unfortunately, fortunately, however, Twitter and a lot of other places are a good platform to share your personal list, your personal journey on those things. And I guess how we very much keep this show as a barely industry show or barely in the games industry show, and I like that space.
Yeah.
So there's a certain amount of, yeah, this is my list. So what if Sayonara Wild Hearts came out a few years ago? It's one of my games of 2021. Shut up. But also, lots of great games came out in 2021. I didn't keep an online list, but in my haphazard journaling experience as a human, I will write down the games that I play in my journal. And, I even have a special color pen and everything because it's journaling, damn it. And while putting the list together, I had kind of a, shit, what did I play this year?
Yeah.
And looking back through that, I think Game of the Year lists are important and great, if only because the year is long and there are many games. And sometimes a game you are obsessed with in February, you barely remember in November, not because you didn't like it, but because so much more happened. And this has been a recent few years where a lot has happened quickly, and sometimes time loses meaning for a little while. And it was good for me to look back on things and realize, oh yeah, I played that this year. It feels like I played it 5 years ago, but no, it came out this year. I played it this year. So it's nice to have a space to, whether you are giving your personal list or a larger publication or a bigger personality in games journalism is giving their top 5, top 10, top 20 that all came out that year. It's a nice little spot to stop and breathe and look back, I think.
Yeah, and I think what was fun, you mentioned forgetting games that you played earlier in the year, later in the year. Also, as games came out, my list shuffled so much, even at the end of the year. And my game of the year for the early part of the year was Death's Door. I loved it. I was obsessed with it. I thought it was great. And then so many other games came out. And even at the end of the year, I was like, my top 5 is locked. Nothing can shake that up. And then I played Life is Strange, True Colors, and I played Chicory. And I was like, well, they're in my top 5 now because they're some of the best games I've ever played. And that was fun for me to kind of run through some games at the end of the year to play. Also, many people, but the person who advocated it the most, Kenneth Shepard, who's a friend of many of my podcasts, kept talking about a game called Before Your Eyes. Not only is it one of the best video game experiences I've ever had, but it's also one of the most unique. And I still, even on this show, so much later, refuse to talk about the details of the game at all because it's an hour-and-a-half long game. It's $6 on Steam. And all it requires you to do is blink and use analog sticks. You literally progress time within the game by blinking. It requires a webcam. That's why it's only on computer. If you hear me talking about this game now, go play it. You will thank me. That said, with my Game of the Year list, when I posted about it, and I also talked about it on a few podcasts, friends of mine, people I barely know, went and played it, and all of them, anyone who's played this game has come back to me and went, thank you, Matt. That was an incredible game. And I love having that kind of recommendation power. It's my favorite thing. I do it with music a lot too. But I'm saying it here and I'm saying it to you, Geoff. Play Before Your Eyes. It's one of the most unique gaming experiences I've ever had. And also one of the most unique gaming and best gaming experiences in 2021. So that was fun from that perspective too. And what I love about Game of the Year lists, from peers or even people I don't know, but that I respect within the community, there are always games I've never heard of. There's never a Game of the Year list. Friend of the show, Scoop Joey, commented on my top 10 list and went, wow, we have 2 games in common. My top 10 list is completely different. I love video games. And it's true. It's this idea that I've played a lot of popular games, a lot of well-known games that are talked about a lot. But a game like Before Your Eyes was only really talked about in my circles, but a lot of the broader audience didn't know about it. I love being able to bring games like that to life. Or my incessant nonstop talk about Guardians of the Galaxy has gotten many of people to play it and enjoy it because I loved that experience so much and I kept posting about it. And I think that's my favorite thing about creating these kinds of lists and doing this kind of interaction, whether written or on Twitter or on podcasts, is because it just makes the gaming sphere feel just a tiny bit smaller and makes things just a little more accessible.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I definitely enjoy the experience of recommending games that people enjoy and finding new favorites because someone who knows me went, "Hey, Geoff, play this."
I did that to you just the other day, recommending a game called Everwood, which
Yes.
a friend of the show, Nate Brandt, recommended on their actual Game of the Year podcast over on the Video Game Robot Show. And like as soon as I heard that it was a rhythm game mixed with like Undertale, I was like, oh, so it's a Geoff game. All right, I
Yeah,
have to tell Geoff.
I didn't even get to tell you. It was already on my Steam wish list. I just haven't
nice.
gotten it yet. I've been keeping my. I didn't know it was on Switch, so
Yeah.
that's a coming up for me. And, well, also when you said Everhood and you first wrote it out, I was like, "Are you talking about Neverhood? That's an old game." I mean, yeah, it's a weird claymation point and click game that makes no sense. That's also a me game, but oh yeah, this one. But it's good to get those sort of recommendations and give those as well. I think something interesting too is, yeah, something like Before Your Eyes would not necessarily show up on sort of what you think of as like the larger top 10 lists because it's a smaller scale game and there's a weird sort of politics, for lack of a better term, for list creation like this. A lot of content creation in a clickbait sort of world, whether video, written, audio, podcast, whatever, is top 10 lists. And were your favorites on here? Let us know in the comments below. And people getting very upset and very up in arms about which games are on a list or where they are placed. And, if this game is if you think this game is better than this game, torches and pitchforks. And so you almost feel the same way, like, well, I spent $60 on this game. I should get this many hours of entertainment out of it. This game had this big of a development time. It deserves to be talked about. But yeah, there's plenty of great smaller experiences that, if you're lucky, end up on like honorable mentions or maybe no higher than number 9 on a list. Like,
Right.
they're there. No, I'm playing smaller things too. But okay, let's talk about those 5 or 6 games that everybody talked about all year. Whether they were a fantastic game or not. Most of them are damned fine games on their own, but are they necessarily games of the year or your game of the year?
Well, and also, like, I think the ubiquitous game of the year this past year, safe to say, is Inscription, which has been on the top of almost every list of the folks I enjoy. And it belongs there. It's one of those games that I didn't play myself, but I watched a friend play through the entire game, and it is an incredible game.
It is.
But it is fun to also see, like, Inscription, for all intents and purposes, is an indie game. It was published by Devolver, and who published tons of games and are pretty ubiquitous in the space, but for all intents and purposes are still an indie game publisher. And so always to see games like that, especially since the creator of this, who also made The Hex and Pony Island and has had some success, I feel like this is the most ubiquitous one of his games has become. I just love when we get to see different people talk about the same ridiculous game. And Inscription is another one, like Before Your Eyes, where most creators I know who talk about it go, it's a card building game. I can tell you nothing else. Like, it's a deck building game. Go experience it. And it's true. I think Inscription, like Before Your Eyes, is a game worth experiencing for yourself and knowing as little as possible. But I think going back to like the time played versus value, I think we're seeing more and more major outlets not mattering as much. I mean, Patrick Klepek, who is a legend within the industry and has been working forever, he said in his top 10 list or top 5 list, he's like, games that made me feel something. And like that was kind of a barometer for me. Like, my top 5 games besides Metroid Dread, which made me feel mostly nostalgia and joy and spooked when I got killed by an Emmy every 10 minutes. All the other games in my top 5 are games that made me feel something. Chicory dealt with depression and imposter syndrome. Before Your Eyes, not giving any details, but it definitely made me feel something.
Deals with blinking.
Guardians of the Galaxy absolutely made me cry several times. Like, that has become a big barometer for me. And that doesn't mean that games like Death's Door or stuff that was closer to the bottom of my list didn't make me feel anything. But the games towards the top of my list made me feel more than just enjoyment, which I think has become more and more an important thing within the games industry and within games journalism, just based on from an outside perspective.
Yeah, I would say so. As I feel like there's I don't want to call it a split or anything, but how I definitely felt it in my own list where there were games where it's like, oh my God, I got caught up in so much of these things, or I was so curious about what was happening next and the twists and the turns. And other times where it was like, this was just really fun. I just game fun.
Yeah.
I jump fun. And there is a tendency to be like, well, is that really a good game? I mean, if that's the intent of the game, yes.
Yes. Yeah.
And I mean, something with Inscription where, without spoiling too much, some people prefer a specific part of the game or a specific aspect of the game and were upset that they didn't get that the entire time. But there's also now, it's not DLC, it's like a mod that Devolver put out that is, okay, here is just that. Have fun.
Yeah.
And you know what? I feel like that part of the game is incredibly fun, and I haven't played Casey's mod yet, but I am going to, and I'm going to have a great time with it because I do love deck builders, and I do love especially ones that can only be done with software, I suppose.
Yeah.
I imagine people have already made like Inscription rules, and you can play
I'm sure that if there is a Kickstarted Inscription actual board, like tabletop version, people would buy it. I think that's pretty definitive at this point.
I've definitely seen people on Reddit and things like that that are remaking the cards and remaking the props, and they are gorgeous.
Yeah.
But that is to say, I think it's great that more games are coming out, or it's a little more commonplace or a little less fantastical that there's a good amount of games that come out every year that connect with you on some level, and not just game fun. But game fun is good. Yeah. But it's very interesting to see where that happens and to see where that's going to evolve over time. Because, yeah, I do love strange, heavily meta games. I love titles that question what it is to be a game and the choices and the things that we accept as normal shorthand as a gamer to do it, and then go, that makes you look like a psycho in real life, and we're going to play by those rules for a moment. And those are so fun. But also, I sometimes just like a good arcadey experience. And it's fun and interesting to see where all those cross over and to see where those things land on someone's top 10 list because of what you're prioritizing or what made a lasting impression.
Yeah, and what I love about my finalized top 10 list is that there are so many games I loved this last year that never made the list. I mean, I finished the Yakuza franchise except for Like a Dragon last year. I got all the way to Yakuza 6, which I still think Yakuza 6 is the best game in the franchise simply because it ends that entire narrative so well that's been going on for so long. But like I played Bowser's Fury last year, which is probably, even though it's only like 3 or 4 hours long, one of the best Mario games I've ever played. I think I liked it better than Odyssey only because it felt more like a mix of 3D Mario and traditional Mario in a way that Odyssey is just another 3D Mario, which I loved, don't get me wrong. But like it felt more of a blending of the genres than any of the other games that had come before. They'd always felt very separate until that game. I played that this year. I played the Pokemon remake this year, which I loved and devoured. Didn't make my list. You know, I got obsessed with Final Fantasy XIV this past year. Also didn't make my list. Like what I love is not only what those lists reveal, but also what they don't reveal. Like I wonder why this game didn't make the list. And what I love about certain outlets like Fanbyte not only had like its top 10 games of the year, but then it also featured each of the writers' favorite game of the year and like with blurbs and graphics on like why it was their favorite game and why it was important. And I love reading those kinds of stories more. Like a flat out list is fine. And I love seeing people's just straight up list on Twitter of their top 10 games. But when someone does a thread like we did or writes an article about why this game was important, I love reading those more than, look, there's value in game good, game bad. But what I love about like previous guest of SideQuest's Lucas White's review of SMT5 is that not only does he talk about it as a fan of SMT and why it's a good game, but he also talks about why it's a difficult game and if people are just getting into it, why they'd like it. The reason I pulled the trigger on SMT5, which I have bought, but of course have not started yet, is because of that review and how Lucas wrote about it and how he not only just talked about is game good, but also here's what the game does. this is why it may or may not fit for you. When I saw that there was an easier difficulty, I was like, I'm in, let's go. Like, I don't have to grind and die constantly. Let's dive in. I want to play another SMT game, and I'm short on time. Most of the time when I play a game on easy, it's not because I don't want the challenge, because again, I did finish Metroid Dread last year. It's more because, well, this is a 50-hour JRPG. Do I want to add another 30 hours of dying constantly? Not particularly, but it depends on the game, of course. And I think that those kinds of write-ups, all of them are important, right? And they all share knowledge about the games industry and the games that we want to play. And there are already so many games I want to play this year. Like at the end of the last year, because there were a bunch of sales, I of course bought Tales of Arise and Yakuza Like a Dragon, both JRPGs, which I didn't realize at the time because I forgot Like a Dragon is a JRPG and not an action game like the other ones. But I bought those both for PS5. I bought both Ni no Kuni games on the Steam sale. I bought a PC copy of Mass Effect Legendary Edition because I'm broken inside. I bought the re-releases of Blood Rain on PC because I love that franchise. And I'm excited about the new 2D one coming to Switch. I bought SMT5. I bought Sayonara Wild Hearts, which I played recently. I bought Time Spinners, finally, which is a Metroidvania on Switch I've wanted to play for a while. I bought Umurangi Generation. So like now my Switch library absolutely looks like my Steam library. And I'm okay with that. But now I have all these games and I'm so excited. I still haven't finished Bayonetta 2. Like I'm excited to play a lot of these games. And so many of these games have been on people's lists and I've wanted to. And with the opportunity of a sale went, well, I might as well buy them. I might as well have them. I've started to treat gaming more like a library of books and less like a thing that I can only do one at a time. Like I've accepted that I will buy a game and it might be 5 years before I play it, but I have it. So when I want to play it and there's an inevitable downtime in a January or December, which is the only time we get a reprieve ever now, because game companies figured out they could sell games in the spring too.
Yep.
And the summer. But like now when I have those reprieve months, I have a game I can play. And so like that's been really exciting. And I think reading these lists have helped me figure out what games to hone in on. And again, like we said before, it's still always growing. I'm always finding more games that I want to play or try.
Oh, same. January 3rd this month, Limited Run Games did its, sort of warehouse clear out blowout sale that it does. And so I'll be getting some of those games whenever they send out. I definitely have done some Steam sale things. In looking through not just the games that I've played, but I've also, looking through my journal of the year and being like, all right, what did I play? What did I do? But looking through game lists, looking through my own spreadsheet of my games, looking through my Steam library, I did not play Wildermyth. I have Wildermyth.
Yeah.
And that's another one that I almost went, do I try to cram it to see if it's good enough to go on my list like that? I feel like that's doing Wildermyth a disservice.
Right.
And that's probably going to be the next game I start playing. But yeah, I'm very much with you, Matt, that it is kind of nice to be able to, I definitely am someone who's all for a video game library. But the idea of, the game comes to you when it comes to you. One of those titles that wouldn't have ended up on my list anyway, but was sort of I did play that this year, Jesus, was, I think it was towards the end of 2020 that Sarah and I started playing Final Fantasy X. And certainly into the new year, we played Final Fantasy X 2. And this was the first time I've gotten more than an hour and a half into Final Fantasy X 2.
Right.
And you know what? I had a great time with it. I really love that game now. It's really good. And I think I would get into arguments with people about this. Like, not just that, people feel they feel. I think I'd be like, no, you don't understand. And yeah, when did that game come out? PS2 era. Came out 2001, 2002. It's been 20 years. You know what? It came around. I came around. It was great.
Well, Geoff, I've got a podcast for you because Normandy FM, hosted by Eric Van Allen and Kenneth Shepard, who we've mentioned before. They are just wrapping up their Final Fantasy X season and are about to start their X-2 season in just a few weeks. So I think I've got a new podcast for you to check out. Normandy FM, of course, having started covering Mass Effect and the Dragon Age, has now branched out as just a video game retrospective. Very different from Reignite. It's mostly about their experiences with the game instead of being the character like Frankie and I do. And incredible. Their Last of Us Part 1 and 2 seasons are phenomenal. They had incredible guests. I highly recommend it. But yeah, if you're just now getting into 10-2, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Kenneth Shepard's favorite Final Fantasy of all time is 10-2, and they're doing a podcast about it.
All right, I'm in. I'm in. But yeah, this is what we get, and this is the cool thing about being able to have these lists, talk about these things, because it also, if a game on someone's top 10 list was from the past year, but it came out early in the year, it could have ended up in someone's, either in their backlog, they bought it on a Steam sale and they don't have a physical copy to remind them and it's just there. Right. Or they went, I should get that at some point, or I'll wait for when it's on sale, and just forgot about it. It's even within the span of a few months. It's nice to get those sort of reminders.
Yeah, totally. And I think that even the games outlets that I follow have done a good job of that. Like Game Informer and Prima Games especially have had really great lists and introspection from all of the writers about like why this game made the list. If we're doing an overall list for the site, like how we picked the games. And like there's always honorable mentions in games that don't make the list that they want to shout out anyway. Or even like for me and a small group of friends within the industry, we played a ton of multiplayer games this year that never made my list, like Pokemon Unite. We started playing Valorant at the beginning of the year, which I almost forgot about. We played the Halo multiplayer. You know, I'm playing Final Fantasy 14 now. Did I mention I'm playing Final Fantasy 14? I love seeing those things make the list too, because like Animal Crossing, like when the DLC came out and the patch, I got back into it for a hardcore week and haven't touched it since. Like that's how that goes for me. Like I love seeing those kinds of things make people's lists too, because when there's a personal touch, it's always more interesting to me than here are the 10 best scored games, you know, which was Game of the Year lists often at certain times from certain publications. And it's starting to feel more and more like websites aren't putting out these lists of what was the highest scoring thing just arbitrarily. They are personalizing it and talking about why these games were important to them instead of important because they sold the most copies.
Yeah, absolutely. The discussion about review scores is long and far from over. And something that I wanted to mention on this topic is the fact that maybe it's because I pay a different kind of attention to the games industry. Maybe it's because technology has evolved or I'm older or whatever it is. I feel as though top 10 lists have moved from the highest rated games or from what feels like a from above declaration. These are the greatest games of the year. Fight me, nerds. You can't win. Ivory Tower proclamations versus a decentralization, even if it's something like Fanbyte puts out their top 10, but everyone on the staff gives their favorite. If people who write for larger publications through Twitter, through Instagram, through YouTube, through TikTok, through whatever other means are able to go, hey, here's my top 10. Feels, I don't know. I don't exactly have the right words for it. It feels better. It feels less personal while being more personal because it's someone being able to say, hey, here are my favorites. They may not be your favorites. You can go, yeah, some of those are, some of those aren't. And I'm going to do my own. Because a lot of those platforms I just mentioned are ones that even people who don't have video game podcasts or publications or jobs in the industry or anything else can just put up their top 10. It's a slightly more public recommendation list for your friends. And I think that also benefits how we react to other people's lists, and it benefits the notion of these sorts of retrospectives, these micro retrospectives, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I am a big advocate of giving voice to the folks who have no job in the industry to just voice why they love games. Mm-hmm. You know, it's the whole premise behind SideQuest. And though the early episodes were people who had some foot in some door, it evolved into people who are just fans of the show making their own episodes. And those are some of my favorites because I love being able to elevate those voices too. And I agree. I think like I would have done a top 10 game of the year list, regardless if I was tangential to the industry. And again, like, yes, Geoff and I have friends in the industry. We've had them on the show. We don't write for a publication. We don't review games. But I still felt important for us on the Fun and Games Twitter, of course, to drive interaction and get more followers and build the brand, blah, 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 blah.
The algorithm.
Like, that was part of it. But also, it was just fun. It was fun to, like, I did my list very differently from Geoff's. I did it throughout the day, which is why, like, I had a bunch of posts in the morning and then the rest crammed in at night because I forgot in the afternoon. But be that as it may, it was fun to keep like going back to it, looking at my list, going, all right, I'm going to write about this one now. And it was a fun way to share. And I heavily encourage anyone, even if you only have like 50 followers and they're your closest friends, do this. I'm glad that so many people like what I have to say about games and being horny for Venom. But beyond that, I liked just the experience of sharing my thoughts, and it was much more fun to do it on the Fun and Games page, where we even have less followers than I have on my personal account, because those are the folks who really are into what we post there, the questions that we share every day, the episodes that we put out, and it was just a fun space to build in, and I encourage anyone to do that and share with their quote unquote audience their thoughts. Look, there's a downside to all of this, right? We all have followers who have to chime in with their 2 cents. That's not always fun. I have several followers who feel it's okay every time I say, go play this game. It's great. I loved it. You should play it. To go, I didn't think it was great. Okay. Why? What's the point? Like, I understand that you want to share your thoughts with me, and I get that to a point, but also, if I'm telling people to go play this game, I'm not asking what you thought of the game. I'm just telling people what I thought of the. Anyway, it's more complicated than that, but I think that fear of people just being assholes aside, you should share your thoughts on what you played, what you loved. Like, I saw people last year doing the movies I watched in 2021, which seemed super overwhelming to me because I watched too many movies. But like, I think all of these kinds of lists of showing what you're doing, how you're interacting in the space, sharing what you love. I've gotten to a point where, and I've talked about this on the podcast, there's a new Mandalorian TV show, or a new Boba Fett TV show, rather.
Book of Boba
spun
Fett,
off of the Mandalorian. Yes, Book of Boba Fett, which spun off of the Mandalorian. I've loved Boba Fett since I was 4 years old. When I tweet about it, I turn off replies because I don't want your opinion, because there's no logic involved in this stream of consciousness. He is my favorite character, and I'm going to love this show, whether it's a trash fire or incredible. So I am just sharing how much I love it, and I don't need any other opinions because there's no logic at play here. There's nothing to convince me of. It's my favorite character since I was 4. I have 10 different action figures of him. I'm going to watch the show. That kind of thing also can be cathartic and fun to just share your thoughts online as well in that way too.
There is no logic in Star Wars fandom, Matt.
That's also true.
And I say that as a fellow dyed-in-the-wool, lifelong Star Wars fan. I have many opinions, many favorites, much of everything. And yeah, sometimes it's just like, I just want to say this thing.
Yeah.
This is not an invitation to discussion. Not every complaint is looking for a solution. Not every effusion is looking for a tempered opinion on it. But it is nice that there is a litany of different ways that we can share our thoughts. Like you said, if you have only 50 followers and they're all people you physically know, close friends, whatever, tweeting your top 10 list is way less weird and intrusive, I guess, than texting it to everybody.
Yeah.
If you texted everybody, hey, here's my top 10 video game list with full write-ups, even if you follow Twitter's character limit, I don't know everybody's social life and everybody's friends. I'm not saying that that's bad or that it doesn't work for people. I'm just saying I don't immediately see how it can be good for everybody when you could just tweet it. And if those same people are going to see it and that feels less intrusive than an email chain or whatever else, or maybe that's what works for people. And these things can kind of up and down. And the way that the borders are porous is kind of, it's good and it's bad, but we're talking about the ways that it's good.
Yeah. I mean, I think that more game discussion is always better than less. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, there will always be bad opinions on the internet. It's the internet, and there's always going to be capital D discourse.
Oh, yes.
But I think that's why it's even more important to find this joy, and why I've shouted out so many names of folks who have personally influenced my love of games in this past year. Because for me, a personal recommendation goes miles beyond any kind of like outlet recommendation. And that said, still outlet recommendations hold weight. But like we've talked about it time and time again, my Shovel Knight origin story is Geoff going, Matt, you have to play this game. Here's the DS copy or 3DS copy. Go play it. And I did. And now I am. So like, but to the same effect, when Patrick Klepek wrote his article on A Short Hike and why this was the surprise hit of whatever year it was, because it was just a chill, fun game that made him feel something. And then I went and played it and also had the exact experience that this writer I respect had. I was like, oh, and I have recommended A Short Hike to everybody who will listen as well. Like, I think that there's a place for both. And I think what I love about this industry is you can find the writers that you gel with. And if you don't gel with a certain site or a certain writer, then don't look at their work. It's not a personal affront. It's not a personal attack. You don't have to comment on their article about how they're wrong. You can just move on and find someone you do agree with or who you do like or whose opinion you do trust. Like, there is a certain thing to be said about living in a bubble, but when it comes to like your hobbies and the things that you love, you should find a spread of people who are like minds and the people who might also challenge those expectations. Like the only reason I ever played Doom 2016 is because I was like, I'm going to play first-person shooters. And I ended up loving that game. And I've played a bunch of other first-person shooters since that I have quite enjoyed. But then I played Deathloop at the end of last year and I was like, I love Arcane. I love Prey. Prey is one of my favorite games of all time. Deathloop isn't for me. I see what they're going for. I suck at this game. It's not fun for me to play. I'm going to move on. And like, that has nothing to do with that game. Deathloop was at the top of so many people's list last year. And it's a cool ass game and like pretty and funny and fun and well made. It's just not for me, you know, in the same way the Dark Souls games aren't. And that's okay. And I think these kinds of lists allow you to navigate that space. And I think also things like Game Pass and like PS Plus, getting free games. Like I own a copy of Bloodborne, which I've never played, but I watched a friend play recently. And I'm terrible at the Dark Souls games. I've tried several times. I might still try it because I have it and it costs me nothing, you know? And I think a lot of top 10 lists can get you to those places too, where you're like, oh, well, I have this game. It's sitting on my PS Plus list. They seem to really like it. It's not going to cost me anything to download and play it. I might as well give it a shot, you know?
And that means it's doing its job in a great way.
Right. Because at the end of the day, I think like our show here, we want to share the joy of gaming. And I feel like this year more than ever, a lot of the top 10 lists that I read, personally at least, we're doing more of that, wanting to share experiences people loved and why they loved them. And critique is important. Rating games is important. Some people just want to score so they know whether they should buy it or not. Not everybody buys 10 games at once, like the crazy people hosting this podcast. Some people buy one game a month, one game a year, whatever it is, and they need to know, am I going to really like this one thing I get to spend money on? Especially kids. You know, when I was a kid, I got a game very infrequently, which is why I played Chrono Trigger over and over and over and over again.
Yeah. On a flip side of that, that also means that a lot of times where there are games like Deathloop that can be very well regarded and be objectively good games, but not your favorite, there's also those games that this isn't a well-regarded game. This may not even be a good game, but I love it. And a lot of times those come from those, you get one game a month, one game a year. I have games that I am trying to reacquire for my collection, not because they're amazing games that I think everyone should play, but because I grew up with them. And there's a certain nostalgia and a certain amount of, there's a reason I still have Contra Legacy of War and Star Wars Masters of Terraskazi for the PS1, and it's not because they're good games. It certainly is not, but it's because they have a certain flair and a special place in my heart. And those are old nostalgic games, but new games end up being that way too for people.
Totally. And I think that finding those games is really important. There are games that I never would have imagined this year that would have been on my, like, look, if you know me, you knew Boyfriend Dungeon and Metroid were going to be on my top 10 list, right? Like those are me games. But like, I never would have imagined I liked Death's Door because Death's Door, difficulty-wise, was akin to a Dark Souls, though not as punishing. And so, like, I never thought I'd vibe with that game, and I did, you know? And then, of course, games like Before Your Eyes, which I'm going to continue to mention until everybody on the planet plays, was totally out of left field for me, and I loved. And, I mean, after playing it, it is absolutely my wheelhouse. But, like, I love that our industry, our hobby, the thing we love that is video games, can have such a widespread appeal and enjoyment. And, like, also, I said it before, Inscription is at the top of a lot of people's lists. I don't know that I would ever play it because I'm not great at deck builders. But watching that game is so awesome in the same way that I've never played a Five Nights at Freddy's game. And Scott Cawthon has turned out to be not a great human anyway. But like, I loved watching Markiplier play those games. In fact, I haven't watched a Markiplier video in years. Not because he's done anything wrong. I just kind of outgrew his content a little bit. I think what he's doing is cool, and it's really impressive how he's grown his brand. But like, I just kind of fell out of love with his weekly content. But when I saw he was playing Security Breach, the nostalgia hit, and I've been watching him play through it because I loved watching him play those other games. And so like, I think that another cool thing about the top 10 list this year in particular, when streaming is as popular as ever and more people are doing it, you can watch and experience these games even if they're not right for you to play. Like, I'm going to look up a Deathloop playthrough and see if I can watch someone play that game because the narrative is fascinating. And like, I also think if you watch someone beat a game, you can consider yourself having beaten the game. And here's why. Because nobody sets the criteria of your experience except you. And that's the thesis of this whole episode. No one defines what your games of the year are except you. If you want to put a 10-year-old game on your game of the year list because it was important to you in 2021 or now 2022, do it. Literally no one can stop you because it's your list. And I think that's super important to remember, is that gaming is a personal experience. It can be a communal experience, but like watching a movie, reading a book, it is an experience that you have, that you can share, but can also be deeply personal. And you don't need to make up rules for why they exist and why you do a thing. You can just do a thing, and it's A-okay.
Yeah, and by that same token, we've talked about all these different platforms and areas and reach and whatever for top 10 lists, but I also advocate making Game of the Year top 10 lists just for yourself. I mentioned before kind of the joy of rediscovering the games that I played this year. Not just discovering a game like, oh, I never played that, but oh, right, I played that. Oh, I really liked that game. Like, looking back on those things was just as important. And as much as, that whole end of the year, the last week of the year that just kind of becomes a weird dead zone for everybody on some level, it's nice to stop and reflect on a larger industry-wide scale. But I would recommend that anybody who plays video games, who plays a lot of games or a few games, make a top list for yourself at the end of the year. Take some time, look back on the games you played. It's nice to take a moment and reflect because, a lot of games come out, and whether you get a game a year or you buy up Steam sale like you're a blue whale consuming krill, whatever level of things, you can take a moment and reflect. And I think that only enriches your hobby. It benefits you. And those moments where you go, what do I play next? You can look back and remember the things that you really enjoyed and get a better idea. Make your own recommendation list for yourself. I think that is a great thing that anyone can do and is so wonderful, so powerful even.
Yeah, I agree. Also, totally out of left field, but looking forward into 2022, I am often reminded that a game called Triangle Strategy is coming out.
Yep.
And be forewarned, listeners, that this is going to become the Triangle Strategy podcast probably after that comes out.
Unfollow me. This is all I'm going to be talking about for the next month.
But that said, if you made a top 10 list on Twitter and you have a small audience and you want more people to see what cool stuff you did, tweet at Fun and Games Pod. Tweet your top 10 list at us if you want us to share it. I will happily retweet any top 10 list from anyone who follows us or listens to us because I want us to share in this experience together. It is a conversation. And so, I want to have those conversations. What was your top 10 list? If you want to share some of your favorite games of the year, I would love to hear about it. I know Joey and Jessica listened to this, and I know Joey's list was very different. Tell us about it. Tell us why. Tell us what games you played. Is it because you streamed certain games and you fell in love with them? What made your top 10 and beyond? We want to hear that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and not just top 10 favorite games. There's all kinds of top 10s. There's listicles and list videos that are out there. What are the things that you look for? Do you make lists based on genre? Do you make them based on character, based on aspects of experience or anything else? What are the sort of lists that you like to see? Even talk to us about those. Let us know on Twitter, over email, over Discord. You can find us on Twitter, Gmail, just about any social media at funandgamespod, funandgamespod@gmail.com. You can find us at certainpov.com, where you can find all sorts of other fantastic shows from the Certain POV network, as well as a permanent invite link to our Discord channel, where we have a lot of these same discussions. Speaking of free games coming up, yesterday, as of the recording of this episode, we were talking about Persona 5 Strikers, which ended up on my top 10 list, ended up in my part of the recap for 2021, and is a PS Plus free game for January. And it's an interesting one because it's kind of a sequel, and you're like, well, do I have to have played Persona 5 to enjoy it? Started a real interesting discussion, gotta say.
Yeah. Also, if you have a chance, rate and review us on your podcast platform of choice. Spotify now allows you to rate podcasts, and they don't require you to write a review like Apple does. You can just put a star rating. And I like to think we're a 5-star podcast. So if you're listening on Spotify, please give us a rating. Or if you have Spotify and you're not listening, listen to an episode there and rate us anyway, because you have to listen first, which makes sense. Also, we are looking forward into 2022. I put a poll on our Twitter page of the kind of content you want to hear from us in the new year. We have some plans already, so it is less decide what we do next and more we want to know what you want to hear so we can continue to evolve the conversations we have on the show. We, of course, are going to have more guests. I'm sure our best friend Yuri will show up again some point this year. But we want to know in 2022 what you're looking for, because we've continued to constantly evolve this podcast, bring on great guests, do really cool new stuff, and we want to keep doing that. Jeff and I have plans to do some co-op streams in 2022. I want to make an even bigger extravaganza of Extra Life this year if we can. So lots of big plans, and we want to hear from you, the listener, because we do this for you.
Yeah, we are very much champions of the individual and communal gaming experience, and we love hearing from the people that are part of our community and sharing that with others, because this is a conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt A.K. Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.
Hey, Nerf herders.
You sure you want to go with that?
Hey, everyone.
There we go. More inviting.
Have you ever had a movie that you really wanted to love, but something holds you back?
Or one that you did love in spite of a flaw?
Well, I'm Case Aiken.
And I'm Sam Alisea.
And on Another Pass, we sit down with cool guests to look at movies that we find fascinating.
But flawed.
And we try to imagine what could have been done when they were made to give them that little push.
We're not experts. We just believe in criticism.
Constructive criticism.
Sure.
So come take another pass at some movies with us.
And every now and then, we can celebrate movies that did it on their own, too.
You can find us at certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Pass it on.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.